Morning. We've been getting a lot of questions about our black and yellow Friday sale, which we've just announced. So we're going to be running through some questions around that today. And I think we're getting a lot of questions because we've done something we haven't done, which is get our premium Flow Hive 2 in cedar. You can see it here in the beautiful Western Red Cedar with the leg kit, with everything. And we've also bundled it with a suit, a hive tool, gloves, smoker and a veil, and a gift voucher which you can use or transfer to somebody else. So I think it's caused a bit of a stir. So any questions about that, you can put them in the comments below and we'll get to answering them. Meanwhile, we'll harvest some honey, and also if you've got general beekeeping questions or flow hive questions, this is the time. We are here each week to help you get started in beekeeping. Now I'm just inserting that key to the top of the frame and turning it, and let's see, the honey's starting to come out. Okay. Now the bees are a little bit hungry at the moment, so we're just going to take one frame of honey from this hive and we'll leave the rest for the bees. And you can tell they're a little bit hungry just by the way they're starting to eat some of the cells out. When you get this patchy pattern where they're starting to eat a few cells, and you can see it here, you can see it here. And if you have a look at this side window, it also matches up with that observation. Look at this beautiful artwork here, isn't it incredible? It starts off with an egg down here and then goes through the process of growing. It's a beautiful imagery to show actually what's happening inside the brood nest as the queen lays its eggs in the naturally drawn comb and goes through the process of metamorphosis and turning into our honeybees. It's such an extraordinary process, and it's lovely to have it illustrated like this. Sarah, who some of you may know if you've been in touch with us before, has done this artwork, and it is something really special. If you take this window off here, you can see that matching up with that rear window view, you can see that they are starting to eat some of the honey out. And typically they eat from the extremities of the hive, so they'll start with the outer frames, but they can also start eating from right above the brood nest as well, in the centre of the hive. So when you see that and there's no new nectar going in there, that's the time when there's not a whole lot of flowers around. So I'm not too worried because we will get more flowers coming soon. So I feel okay about harvesting some honey and remembering it's only one frame out of 6. Look at it pouring out. It's a beautiful colour. It's got this kind of rich caramel colour. I'm going to taste that now. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below. Also let us know whereabouts in the world you're tuning in from and what you might like us to cover next week. Okay, that's that beautiful butterscotch flavour that everyone goes crazy for in the office. And I thought it would be, just looking at the colour, it's got that colour that almost looks like that. So any questions, just put them in the comments and we'll get to answering them.
Just experiencing some technical difficulties with sound.
Okay, we've got we got a sound issue. Somebody give us the heads up if they can hear now. Have we got a sound issue still? Sound issue. Give us a rating out of 10, anybody that's watching, to tell us whether
they're
we
saying no sound,
have sound.
but it's coming through here, it's sound.
Okay, no sound.
Diana says she can hear fine.
Ah, okay. So apparently people can hear fine. Fantastic.
Okay, good to go.
Okay. Sometimes there's just a bit of a glitch there. Thank you for being patient. But the jar is looking good. I was just saying, for anyone that missed it, this is one of our favourite types of honey. It's got this beautiful kind of butterscotch flavour, and here in the Flow Hive office, it's one of the prized honeys that the team goes crazy for.
We have a question that's come in. Selwyn is from Vancouver. Does he have to be careful when choosing which paints to use on the exterior of the flow hive, or is regular house paint okay? The painted hives look gorgeous.
Okay, so regular house paint is what will last the longest in an exterior environment. Typically, commercial beekeepers will treat their boxes in chemicals. They'll dip the whole box in quite the strongest, or probably the cheapest house paint they can find, inside and out, and the bees do fine in that. Now, what we're finding these days is people would prefer to leave it more natural for their bees, so we recommend leaving the inside of the hive, where the bees are actually walking, natural for the bees, and just painting the outside. So it won't matter what type of paint you put on the outside of the hive. So good question. You can also oil it like this. So the cedar is a good choice if you want to keep it looking nice and wooden like this, in which case you can use an outdoor timber oil, and that'll give you a long-lasting look. However, if you want to keep it looking beautiful like that, you will need to do some maintenance, rub it back every now and then, and add some more oil.
Adrian from Central Valley, California says it's his first winter with bees and it's getting cold. They're noticing the hive activity is in decline. Is this normal in the winter? They haven't done a brood inspection, so do they need to do that?
Okay, so the best information for you will be from your local beekeepers on how often you need to do your brood inspections and when. As it gets cooler, the main thing, if you have a long cold winter ahead, is making sure you have enough honey for your bees to survive the winter. The honey stores are their energy source, and that's what they need to survive a time with no flowers. So to do that, find out how much honey you might need stored in your hive to survive the winter, and if you don't have enough, then you might need to feed your bees to build up those stores, and that's best done prior to the winter coming, so that they can store some in the cells. Now, we've got some videos on feeding bees as well. We covered a bit of that last week, and we've also got another one where I show you how to make some simple feeders for your hive. Now, there is a little bit more, and there's more information on our website about overwintering your hive if you do live in an area where you have long cold winters. So great question, thank you.
Steve has a hybrid hive and is wondering, how does he know when to harvest? Is it when the traditional frames are full?
So if you've got the hybrid hive, so what he's talking about there is the one with the 3 or 4 frames in the centre, and then traditional honeycomb frames either side for collecting honeycomb. Typically, it depends. Sometimes your bees will preference the flow frames over the traditional frames, and sometimes vice versa. So the time to harvest your flow frames is when you can see the honey here, and you can see it, this capping line. If you have a look where my finger is there, you'll see the bees have put their wax cap over the cells, saying the honey is ready. The bees are happy with the moisture content, so the honey will keep, and that means it's also ready to keep on the shelf in your jar. So that visual is really good. You do get some bees that, for whatever reason, don't like to fill this last cell, and if you think that's happening, then get in your bee suit, pop the lid off the hive, and pull out one of these frames and just have a look for yourself and see what this imagery here is telling you about the rest of the hive inside. And that's a good thing to do as you get to know your bees and the flow frames.
Nick's from Tasmania and says that some people have said that timber hives are not, and the flow hive in particular, are not well suited to his environment.
Okay, Tasmania. We do have a lot of customers in Tasmania. We also, it's interesting, and I think it's a washover from the very beginning, where when we first launched, we had a lot of people saying that won't work in my area, it's too cold where we are, and so on, and that is still getting propagated amongst beekeepers, even though we have a lot of people keeping bees in Europe, even though we have a lot of people keeping flow hives in Canada, Norway, Tasmania, Victoria. So it doesn't hold weight, that argument, but nevertheless it still gets perpetuated amongst existing beekeepers, mainly because there's a lot of beekeepers that are happy with the way they're doing it, and they have to find some reason why the flow hive isn't good. And I get that, you know, I get attached to things I do in my life too, but you know, there actually isn't any reason why you can't keep a flow hive in Tasmania. I have been there and I've spoken at the Sustainability Festival, and one beekeeper told me that if you don't have 10 frame, which is the slightly wider one we sell, and a double brood box, you won't survive the winter. And then another beekeeper says no, a setup like this with 2 8 frame boxes, which is this which suits 6 flow frames, a bit confusing there, but a setup like this will survive the winter fine in Tasmania. So you get varied opinions. That was 2 commercial beekeepers, and if I were you, I would seek more opinions about the flow hive before you make up your mind.
Sam is asking, why does the flow super have to go on top? Could you put the super on the bottom and the brood box on top?
Here's someone who's thinking. That's I've rarely had anybody think of that idea. Well done. It is something we tried, because it obviously would be easier, because you can easily check your brood, which is then sitting on top. You don't need to check these flow frames so much, so they could sit on the bottom. And while we had success with it, it just seemed that the bees weren't as enthusiastic to do it that way around. I think naturally they normally keep honey above the brood nest. So the natural way around is honey on top, I think, but by all means experiment and see how it works for you. You might like to start off this way around and switch it around and just see how enthusiastic they are at continuing to fill the flow frames after your harvest. So great idea there.
Dave's asking, how do you deal with wax moth and hive beetles? Have you ever heard of folks using thermo treatments when dealing with pests in the hive?
Okay, so wax moth to me isn't a pest that bothers me at all. Reason being is inside the hive, the bees patrol that area and they don't allow wax moth to be there unless your hive is dying out, or perhaps if you live in a very cold region, wax moth could operate in part of the hive when the bees were in another. So when they cluster in a ball. But wax moth for me aren't an issue at all. Hive beetle can be an issue, and so what we've done is developed a screen bottom board with a tray underneath that you can use to catch those beetles. I'll show you what that looks like now. If you come here, you can see a vented cover here, and that allows us to control the ventilation. Vents up gives you ventilation up in this area under the screen. Vents down, it actually gets blocked off when this piece comes into contact with the tray's handle here. Now this has actually got water in it, which is interesting because it hasn't rained in a long time, so I'm not sure why there's been water put in there, but it's actually doing a job of catching the hive beetles. You can see one there. So typically you put oil in here to catch the hive beetles, and you can see one there. I'll see if I can get it on my finger. And this tray is good for catching those pesky beetles. There's one there. So those little beetles, when the hive gets weak, let's say they've swarmed or something like that, they can take the opportunity when there's not enough bees to police all the frames to lay eggs, and what you get is your colony turning into a beetle home instead, which is very horrible actually. Gets all slimy. So that tray is great for catching the beetles. People also like to use it for inspecting levels of mites in continents that have the varroa mite. The white surface, you could turn it up the other way if you wanted to. You can do your treatments, or you can just count the numbers of mites that drop through onto that area to gauge an idea of the presence of mites in your hive. Is there any more to add to that question?
Have you heard of people using thermo treatments?
I haven't heard of thermo. I don't know anybody that's been using thermo treatments. But what that is, as far as I know, is heating up the hive to the point where the mites can't handle the temperature. So we don't have varroa mite in Australia, so it's not something we have to deal with. If anybody's online and knows a bit more about thermo treatments, please put it in the comments below. I'm not sure how well it works or how useful it is, but there's lots of people experimenting with different things, which is good, in order to combat those little mites that really do wreak havoc in hives in many parts of the world.
Andre would like to know, can he paint the outside of his hive even while the bees are inside?
You can actually. Always think about safety when working with your hive. So that means getting in your protective gear and knowing your safety. We have links on our websites. I find the bees don't mind at all if you're touching up the paintwork with the bees inside the hive. But you'll have to be careful around the entrance side. The same thing with oiling your hive. Like this, you could add a fresh coat of oil. In fact, this has just had a single coat of oil and probably needs another one, and we'll just do that with the bees in the hive.
We've had several private messages coming in asking why, if we're an Australian company, we're running a Black Friday sale.
Okay, so as you can see, this is a black and yellow Friday. We have fun with the term Black Friday, and we make it a black and yellow Friday. And this is a beautiful piece of artwork, and the reason why we do it is because we have a large community in the USA which really does celebrate the Black Friday sale time. And although I'm actually opposed for consumerism for the sake of consumerism, I genuinely think beehives and keeping bees is a very good purchase, and we of course want to give people that option in that sale time when they're looking to get gifts or get something for their family. So I believe keeping bees is a wonderful thing to do, and if you're in Australia and you're going, why are they doing this American style Black Friday sale, then of course you can come back next week and the sale won't be on.
Michael is just saying that the bushfire smoke in the Hawkesbury is affecting the hives.
It's incredible the amount of bushfires at the moment. If you tuned in last week, you would have heard me talk a little bit about it. I've personally been out firefighting with my brothers and other members of the team. Stone behind the camera here, and also Jai, our other camera operator. We've all been out fighting fires, and we actually did miss some of the live broadcasts because of that. So many fires in Australia. It's really quite sad to have that amount of habitat burning, and we really hope to get some rain soon, and that everybody stays safe for themselves, their houses and their bees. So it's there's a couple of reasons why it may affect your honey, and the first one is when it's really dry, as you can see out here, brown paddocks and smoky skies. When it's really dry like that, the flowers don't tend to flower so much. You can see beautiful flowers in our garden here, but that's because we've been watering them. And that's the time when it's really dry that we get what's called a dearth, which means no flowers for the bees to forage on. So if that's happening to you, you can tell by looking in the windows and seeing whether the bees are adding to the honey supply or taking away from the honey supply. And in some parts of Australia, you may need to feed your bees for them to have enough stores to last the winter. Here we're not too worried because we get flowers in the winter time, and there's probably going to be some nice summer flowers coming up as well. So like any form of agriculture, when the weather is fantastic for promoting great blooms and great crops, then you get great harvests. But when it's not, then you may not get great harvests. And it's about your animal husbandry of looking after your bees during those times when there's not enough flowers. Have a look at the broadcast from last week. We talked all about that, about feeding bees and making sure you look after them in times of dearth.
Aaron and Melanie live on a small block in Perth. They have a flow hive, and Aaron, I believe, is building a chimney to direct the bees up and away. Is there any issue with this?
Bees will go incredibly long distances through chimneys. Now, I believe that if you have a nice wide chimney, they can fly up and down it rather than crawl, so that will speed things up a little bit. And I've heard of, in fact, there's people in Australia here that put hives into shopping centres, then have the chimneys going up into the air conditioning systems along and out of the building somewhere else, so you can have a beautiful observation hive right in the middle of the shopping centre. So that's a done thing, and you might want to do a little research on how big the chimney should be so that they can fly, or you could simply test it by observation of trying different sizes. If you have some clear tubes, typically start off with them encased with black cloth or something, and as they get used to the pathway you can then open it up if it's inside, and the bees will still know their way without getting confused about the light. And it's a beautiful thing to have that level of observation. It's you can have a hive inside and put a conduit to the outside. Of course, it might be a little bit more advanced having a beehive in your house.
Jim's in Crescent Head, and his brood box has been up and running for about a month. He's asking, how do I keep the ants out? I tried some small containers with water, but a few bees drowned even with a stick for them to get out.
Okay, so one bee just fell in here, getting it out on the end of the flow hive key here. Bees can be immersed in honey for quite some time and they're still fine. What I'm going to do is just put that back at the hive entrance, and the other bees will quickly lick it up and it'll crawl back in. So, come on, here we go.
Do you need me to repeat that? Jim's in Crescent Head and has a brood box that's been up and running for about a month, but is having a problem with ants. He can't keep them out of the brood box.
Okay, ants. So ants are a cosmetic issue more so than a problem for the bees usually. So bees, if you've got a healthy colony, will keep any form of ants out of their hive. If what you're seeing, it sounds like you've just got the brood box set up, but sometimes you'll get a little bit of honey dribbling in this area, and ants will go for that, and you'll find them behind the covers. You might find in wet times that ants might move in behind the windows just for a place to go, and it's a case of opening up those areas and brushing them away and trying to discourage them. Now, if you've got our flow hive 2 like this, it's got these legs which you can extend and put some grease on them. So you might like to put Vaseline, a white Vaseline, so that it's less black greasy everywhere on those bolts, and that will discourage the ants from being able to climb up onto your hive. Now, of course, if you're doing that, ants could still walk along foliage like this and onto the hive, so you'll need to trim back things that are touching your hive if you're going for that isolation method using Vaseline on the bolts. Now, some people like to put the feet in cups of water. You can do that. However, that requires a bit more maintenance, keeping up the water in the cups. Some people put cinnamon powder behind the covers. That does tend to discourage ants, so that might be a simple method. Throw some cinnamon powder in there and close it up. They will tend to move back in if they've got a good population there, but if there's not many, it will discourage them and they probably won't move back in. Keep the questions coming. There's so many great questions.
Fiona has a really early hive from 2015. She's asking, can you please tell me if you have done or will do a video on how to clean the flow hive frames, as her frames are in need of cleaning. She's in England.
Okay. So thank you very much for being one of our founding supporters. It's amazing the start we had and the amount of people who were ready to take up our flow hive invention even before we had produced them. So thank you so much. That gave us a wonderful start in order to build this company and be able to keep inspiring people to keep bees all around the world. Now, in order to clean the flow frames, there's a few things. Now, typically the cells of the flow frame, if you look in here, the bees take care of that, and they can if they stay on a hive, they will stay quite clean. Now, if you've left the flow frames out off the hive for months at a time, then they could get a bit messy. Wax moth can move in and things like that, and they might need some cleaning just with some hot water drying out before placing it back in the hive. Now, in terms of this trough area, if you have a look here, sometimes this area, I'll just take this little cap out. We've got a lot of wind here today, and our cameraman looks like he's got a bee up his pants. So this area in here, you can see a little bit of grime in there. That may need cleaning. Now, you can do that just by putting a cloth, like a dishcloth or something, on the end of your flow key, wetting it down and poking it in this area and giving it a good wipe out. If that's not good enough, then you can also put a hose in there, preferably a warm hose, and it'll flow in and out again, in and out again, and that will help to clean that area. Now, it's not something I usually ever do, so it's not something that I guess I rarely do it. If there was a whole lot of grime building up, then I might choose to do that, but generally you don't have to. And then this view here. Now, what you're seeing here, this frame here has actually been used a number of times, whereas this one has only been used a few times by the bees, and you can see the wax build up on those cells, which does give a bit of a dirty appearance, but it doesn't actually affect the function of the frame. So if you want to get rid of that waxy appearance and get back to this fresh new look, what you'll have to do is take the flow frame apart and pull the ends off and clean these cells. Or you might be able to do it without by actually cleaning down those individual cells. It's not something I've done a lot of. Let us know how you go if you want to experiment with that. Some great questions, keep them coming.
Rob's in the UK and he says, my girls filled the flow frames beautifully, but once he removed the flow frames, he noticed that they'd completely filled the second brood box with honey. He's left that on for them for overwintering. Will that be enough?
Okay, that sounds great that you've got a whole brood box or a whole nother box full of honey for the winter, and that does sound good to me. However, you want to check with your local beekeepers as to how much honey you need for your bees to survive the winter. Get more opinion than one, because opinions will vary. Here we don't need any. If you go down south a bit further, then you'll need a full box of honey to survive the winter. So it really does depend on your area and how long the time is without flowers and how cold it is, because the bees disengage their wing muscles and vibrate to warm up the hive, and in doing so they'll use a bit of honey to keep the hive warm during winter.
We've got a question here from Patrick. It's quite a long one. G'day Cedar, do you require fully drawn out brood box frames for the colony to be able to store nectar in the super and make honey? I know you get this question about the bees not going upstairs, but my flow hive too has been cranking with bees, and I can see there's an awesome nectar flow, but they still aren't taking to the super frames. He has done the trick of smearing wax on the frames.
Yep.
He's happy to be patient, but the hive has swarmed twice in 2 days and he's wondering where he's going wrong.
Swarming before they filled the super. Now, we did have a colony that liked to do that, and I guess that depends on your bees. Every hive is a bit different in what they'll do, and it's unfortunate if they swarm before filling the cells, because that really drops the numbers of bees and makes it hard for them to fill the box. So I guess hopefully next time you get different genetics, because that queen has actually taken off with the swarm, and next time you'll have different genetics in your hive as they mate with drones from other hives, and hopefully there'll be genetics as such that will continue to fill the box up before swarming. So what I'm seeing here, and this is typical of when there's not much flowers around, you get some interested bees coming for the honey. So knowing that it's a time where there's not a whole lot of flowers around, I brought something to cover up the jar, and it's a good thing to have handy, especially if you're harvesting in a time when there's not many flowers around. Out you go, out you go, there we go. And you can simply just put a wax wrap or a piece of kitchen wrap around the top of the jar, and that will keep any bees out of the honey.
Brian's wondering...
I didn't,
sorry, there was more?
Yeah, there was a bit more. Anyway, continue.
Brian's wondering if you could use beeswax on the exterior of the hive.
Okay, I have experimented with wax dipping, and I think the wax that our hives were dipped in was a little bit dirty, so the finish didn't come up as well as I had have hoped. But I have seen beautiful beeswax dipped hives where they actually heat a lot of beeswax up, and in some cases it's cut with a solvent, and it's actually a process for preserving wood, and then the whole box is dipped into a drum full of that. Now it uses a lot of beeswax, so you'd have to have a real abundance of that in order to do it, but what you get is that the wood really soaking up that wax, acting as a preservative for the wood, and if you've got nice clean wax, you might get a nice finish of it as well on the outside. I haven't heard of people just using it as a paint-on finish. I'm not sure that would work so well, but if you've got experience with that, then put some comments in below if you've got experience with using wax as a finish. Now, just getting back to the other question, what they were talking about was putting a bit of wax on the flow frame in order to get the bees using it more effectively. Now, you can do that by scraping some wax off the top of the brood nest. If they're ready for the super, they probably would have built up some wax on top of the frames, and pressing it into the flow frame surface. You won't damage the flow frames, just use your hive tool, press it in. We've got some FAQs about that on the website. The bees will then repurpose that wax, and you can even watch it happen in the brood window, and that'll get them started if they're being a bit slow to start. The recipe I usually find is lots of bees in the hive, so when you open the window you can see lots of bees on the frames coinciding with a nectar flow, and then the bees are quite quick to fill. However, as said, you do get an occasional colony which which will swarm prior to filling a box full of honey. So pretty much that is genetically based, and I have seen that a couple of times, but generally most hives are happy to fill it up before they get to that swarming level. Now if you're having a lot of trouble with swarming, you might want to have a look at some of our other videos on taking hive splits or doing spring management in order to prevent swarming in your hive. Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions.
Lizzie is in Perth where it's hot and dry. She's asking, is it okay to leave the vent door off in the hot weather as her bees are bearding daily?
Okay, so if you've got a really lot of hot weather, hot days, you can actually take the vented cover right off and take the tray right out to get maximum ventilation into your hive. And we do have some really hot days here in Australia, so during that time it might be a good idea to allow a lot of ventilation. Another thing that will cause a lot of bearding is simply a lot of bees in your hive, and they need to clear out of the way to allow ventilation. So it is typical come summer when there's a lot of hot days, your bees have gained a bit of momentum, laid lots of eggs, there's lots of bees in the hive from the spring boom, and you'll get a whole lot of bearding at the front of the hive. Sometimes it's just because they're hot, and other times it's because the bees are preparing to swarm. So there's a few things that you might like to do in order to help your hive at that stage. You might like to take a split if there's that many bees, and that way you get another hive, which is fantastic. If you don't want it, somebody else will. And that will alleviate some space in your hive. Or you could add another brood box, or you could add another super to make more space for your bees in the hive. And as said, more ventilation by removing the tray altogether.
Andre is wanting to know what kind of oil can he use to catch the hive beetles in the tray.
Okay, any kind of cooking oil. So that can be stuff you've already used in your kitchen, or in my case I run my car off old fish and chip oil from the chip shop, so I've got plenty of that, which I tend to use. But you can also use just some cheap cooking oil from the supermarket. When you pour it into the tray, it doesn't need to be deep, but it's best if it covers the surface in the bottom of the tray. We put baffles in there, so if your hive is on a bit of a slope, then it'll stay in those compartments in the tray. We've counter-sloped the tray so that when you have your hive on a perfect harvesting angle, which is set by the level on the side, then the tray is counter-sloped at the same angle so that your oil will sit in the tray without all pooling to one side.
Ashley got their 5-frame nuke last Thursday and installed it in their Flow Hive brood box the same day. How long should she wait before checking on them? It's been amazing watching the bees, and the kids have loved seeing them working.
Okay, it depends a little bit on your strategy. If you're using the foundationless frames that with the comb guide, then you'll need to check them, I would say every week or two, depending on how fast they're going, and that will depend on the strength of the colony and how many flowers there are available to the bees. So if they're going great and they're really foraging, then check every week or two so that you can make sure they're building straight on the comb guides. If you're using foundation, then it's less, you don't need to check as often, because the bees will be guided by those straight foundation lines to be building straight comb in the brood box. Also check in with your local beekeepers as to what pests or diseases might be in your area, depending on if you're in a continent with varroa mites. So there might be some management you need to do in regards to those as well. Fantastic, good to hear you're getting started in beekeeping. Feel free to ask as many questions as you like, and we're here every week to help with answers.
Dave's asking if the Flow frames ever squish bees when you open the frame to harvest.
Okay, great question. Now my father and I spent a decade working away trying to iron out any problems with the flow hive frames. Now, and that was one of them. How do we make it so when the parts move inside the hive that it doesn't squish any bees? Because there could be an area, even though they've filled most of the frame with honey, where there's no capping and no honey in the cells, and bees could be down them when the parts move. So what we did was, instead of making it like, if you imagine this is a cell, instead of making it so these parts meet like that, which works for harvesting, but then we found that bees' legs or wings, if they were down the cells, could move between these two areas. You put them back and then they've got a leg or a wing stuck in between the parts. So what we did was actually take away part of that cell and make it more like this. So the bees then fill this V shape with wax, and what that means is when the parts move, like so, this bit here is just wax, and when it moves back there's a gap between the parts, so legs or wings of the bees are unlikely to get stuck in that area. So we wanted to make it so even if you harvest really early, the bees will be okay in your cells. Now it's a bit of a game of maths and sizes with the bees, because we also wanted to make it so when you harvested, the bees couldn't crawl down the cells when they're in that position. So we tried to size it so that when it's open, the bees are unlikely to go down, but they can still just squeeze out as well. And if they can't, if they're a little bit stuck in their own wax, then when it moves back, they'll be able to squeeze out of those cells. So long-winded answer, but your bees will be fine when the channels are formed inside the comb to allow the honey to drain out of the hive.
Fiona's in England and couldn't find her queen, but in September she went to see if she had any honey and every frame was empty. Any ideas why this has happened?
Okay, so you get different colonies, different seasons, different areas of the world. There'll be different results, just like any form of farming. So the thing you need, the recipe to get a full box of honey, is lots of bees in your hive, a strong nectar flow for long enough for the bees to then store honey. So if they haven't managed to do that, then you'll need to feed them prior to the winter coming in order to build up some stores. Now there's more information about that on our website. The other thing that's good to do is have multiple hives, and you'll find that one hive won't go so well, whereas another hive might just really be bringing in the honey. Stone here behind the camera had his first hive, and he was harvesting every 2 weeks for all through the spring when he put his hive together. And that was a fantastic season and a really strong colony. So you get results like that, but equally you get results where somebody might not get honey in a whole season. So you do have to be patient with it sometimes, and hopefully you have better luck on the next time round. One more question.
Justin's asking, is cooking oil better than diatomaceous earth for using in the tray?
I would recommend cooking oil for catching beetles rather than diatomaceous earth. If people don't know what that is, it's basically a powder made from it's actually fossilized insects, I believe, and the powder is so fine that it feels like just powder to us, but to insects it's very sharp little grains of powder that get into their leg joints and into their bodies and parts of their shell, and they will actually die from going into that. People use it as a natural cockroach treatment in their cupboards and so on, so you can try that in your tray. However, what will probably happen is some rain will come, some water will splash into the entrance, and it'll wet that powder and it won't become useful anymore. So for that reason I would use oil, and if we get if we get rain coming in, then the water will just sink under the oil and it will still work for its purpose. Thank you very much for watching, and if you do have any more questions about a Black Friday sale, this is a great time to get into beekeeping, and hopefully we're available to answer all your questions. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below and we'll continue to answer them. Tune in again next week and we'll have something interesting to show you and be answering more questions.